Hey guys, it's Jay Calderon with 12rounder.com here, bringing you this week's installment of 12 Rounder Radio. I apologize for a little bit of the tardiness there. Had some technical difficulties. That being said, enough of that shit. Let's just get right into it here. So, first and foremost, I'll give you a bit of the quick results from this previous weekend. Of course, we had Cornelius Bundridge getting a bit of an upset, beating Carlos Molina for a version of the junior middleweight title. And in terms of middleweight action, we had a bit of an upset as well, with Jermaine Taylor beating Sam Solomon for the title. You also had Lee Selby and Anthony Joshua being successful in London against opponents Joel Brunker and Dennis Bakhtov, respectively. You can check out all the results, those results, and a bit more detail in the links below in the description at either Quick Results or, well, actually just Quick Results. In any event, those are the results. Now that we got that out of the way, let's get to the slightly funner part, where I start talking about, nonsense and basically just making a fool of myself. Very, very, very happy, in my personal opinion, I am very happy with the progression of Anthony Joshua. I think, let me put it to you this way. After what I saw this weekend against the aforementioned Bakhtov, I thought, you know what? Considering where he is, this was a perfect performance. He did a couple of new things. He still showed us what he can do. He's still a very raw talent. It's not that he's any sort of finished article, any sort of finished product. He's not exactly ready for shelves, let's just say. That being said, the prototype thus far, very promising. Now, the consensus out there for a lot of, not even the consensus, that's the wrong word, the criticism of Joshua, coming from those that care to criticize a guy who's had less than 10 fights so harshly, would be that he's still a bit too stiff at times. He's a bit robotic at times with his upper body. He doesn't have as much fluid movement as you might want to see. Some people have even gone so far as to say he's a bit too muscular, which to me just sounds like some old hating-ass bullshit. But still, some people have said it and have suggested that perhaps it might lead to potentially injuries and things like that, which there is something of an argument there, but nonetheless, not to the extent that people have suggested. Last I checked, Vladimir Klitschko was quite impressive in terms of muscles himself. Doesn't tend to have too many injuries that stop fights or his dominance in the very same division. So for all intents and purposes, he could be okay, in so long as he ensures himself that he takes care of his body and he handles himself the correct way. All of that having been said, there's also the consensus among his critics that he's being brought along too carefully, perhaps, or that he's fighting nothing but tomato cans, and blah, blah, blah. There's a lot of this sort of, same sort of rhetoric that comes with any sort of prospect that's highly touted. There are going to be a bunch of people that buy into it. There's going to be a bunch of people that absolutely despise the person. And then there's, hopefully, a sliver of people somewhere in the middle that are just sort of like, well, see what happens. In any event, my personal criticism of Joshua, if I were to have a need to make those sort of comments, would be a bit different than that sort of general criticism from his critics. I would say I did personally think that he was a bit too stiff and robotic early in his fights, his first few fights, but that being said, it was his first few fights. To assume that he was somehow going to be the most fluid, seasoned vet in his second or third outing, for example, I just didn't have that assumption in my mind. I just knew that was something that at the very least would have to be improved upon. And in my personal opinion, in a relatively short period of time, less than a year as a matter of fact, he has definitely relaxed in there. He seems a lot more composed, a lot more poised, and to be truthful, I have no real issue with that anymore. The issues that I suppose I would have is that I want to make sure that he's not cocking his hands too much. I want him to keep that guard tight when he needs to, and I don't want him ever to seem like he's being manhandled in that ring. Even with Bakhtov, to a certain extent, when he had Bakhtov against the ropes, there seemed to be this entangling of their gloves, and Joshua seemed to have to really pry his hand loose there. I want to see that spitefulness in Joshua, and I want to see that physical ability to rip your hand free and start doing more damage. That's what I like in a big, brooding heavyweight such as Joshua. That being said, it was momentary, and these are very minute complaints, because at the end of the day, for where he is and for what he is and for what he might be able to become, this is a pretty good performance, and I was, like I said, pretty pleased with it. Now, of course, when you face this sort of criticism, and by you I mean the fighter and the team of the fighter, you tend to do things that might perhaps endanger your future prospects. And to me, that's always an issue. I think I would rather face criticism on the way to the end of a plan than just switch plans entirely mid-plan and hope for the best. Because on the one hand, and that seems almost obvious, but you would never realize how much people do that, especially when it comes to effectively investments. And that's what fighters are from a promotional standpoint. Fighters are investments. Because they're certainly not going to make money with most fighters early on in their career. They are investing in that fighter for the future. Obviously, in this case, it's a bit different because Joshua's damn near a ticket seller at this point already. He hasn't even had 10 fights, but that's a different issue. Again, 2012 gold medalist, decent looking guy, big muscles, heavyweight. Olympics happened in London. I mean, literally, it's a layup. He was supposed to be a star. But all of that having been said, not to mention that he punches pretty damn hard. That's always a plus. But all of that having been said, these are investments, and a lot of times you see people lay out these plans, and then all of a sudden, a little bit of criticism, one thing goes wrong, and all of a sudden they're winging it. And again, I'm not saying that you don't learn to adapt or that plans don't at times have to change. But at the same time, if you're confident in your plan and you know that there are going to be these sort of moments where people question the moves or people question how long it's taking or how fast you're doing it, whatever the case may be, you have to know that if you're confident in this plan, you should stick to the plan. And I'm not saying that they're necessarily diverting from the plan, but it seems as though Matchroom is moving Anthony Joshua along quite quickly. I remember after his fourth, maybe fifth fight, I remember his promoter, Eddie Hearn of Matchroom, saying that they were going to take their time with someone like Joshua. You can't rush someone like him. He's a very valuable asset, so on and so forth. And again, understood. I agree with them, as a matter of fact. Understand it completely. And yet you begin to hear these rumblings from hardcore fans, or whatever you want to call them, people with no lives like myself, basically. And you hear these people talking about, well, he's being handled too lightly, it's time to take off the little kid gloves, time to move him along. He's a heavyweight, he knows what he's doing, blah, blah, blah. The thing is, first of all, no, he doesn't know what he's doing. He still has plenty to learn. And secondly, even if he did know what he was doing, from a financial standpoint, considering where they are with Joshua and how well he can sell a ticket against Bakhtov, I mean, no offense to Bakhtov, but who the hell cares about Denis Bakhtov, really? I mean, in London, if you mention that name, do you think people are just going crazy? No, they don't care, but they sell tickets with Joshua. So why wouldn't you milk it? At least to some extent. I don't see why you would. I don't see how anyone with any understanding of business of any kind, and I'm not saying I'm a businessman by any means, but with any understanding of business, I don't see how you couldn't at least see the value in such a move. But again, in terms of just future business, you have to understand that the investment to an extent has to be protected, and yet people have complained about his level of opposition and the rate at which he was being moved for the first 5-6 fights, and still some people still believe he's being moved a bit too carefully, where he'll be fighting Michael Sprott the 22nd of next month, I believe, on the Tony Bellew, Nathan Cleverly pay-per-view undercard, which is a decent fight for, again, in my opinion, for Joshua, at this point in his 9th professional fight. To fight a guy who has quite a few more fights than that, and who has faced a virtual who's who of British boxing, and pretty much world boxing that comes through Britain. It's a pretty decent name, it's a pretty decent test, and at the very least it gives you fun little things to do, like say, oh, he knocked him out in this much time, or oh, he couldn't knock him out, or whatever the case may be. It's a reasonable fight for an undercard in Liverpool on a date where Joshua really isn't going to be the primary focus anyway. It's a fine fight. The fight that sort of, made me sort of raise my eyebrows a little bit was the fight with David Price. Now, David Price, there are chin issues or concerns or questions, and there are stamina issues, concerns, and questions as well. And it's not as though if Joshua were from now till, say, May, if he were to get in I don't know, say another 5-6 fights, not including the Sprott fight. So that's about 7 extra fights on top of his already 8. He'd be at 15 or so. Price at the most would be at about 20. It's not the most absurd fight to make in that respect. However, to me, it does seem like an interesting fight. Trust me, I'm watching it if they put it on. Okay, I'm not protesting this fight. But it does seem like a fight that doesn't necessarily need to happen. It's a fight that seems to have quite a bit of risk. And if Josh, and trust me, there's reward there. If Joshua is able to beat someone like Price, and I'm speaking from the Joshua perspective in this one because that's the person who just fought this weekend. So from the Joshua perspective, yes, there's certainly great reward to be able to beat someone like that who was so highly touted, and to a certain extent, especially with Sauerland event handling his career now, there's certainly a lot of touting yet to be done. But at the end of the day, a guy who was considered perhaps one of the next world champions, or at least the guy to potentially get a shot at a world title. For you to now say, yes, we might be at the very least beginning to discuss a fight with a guy who has twice as many fights as our 8-fight novice. That to me, there are certain bells that ring, and there's only one of two that it could really be. It's either that you don't think he's going to be this great fighter, in which case you're just cashing out and you're looking to make the big fight before he's exposed by someone who brings less money to the table, or you really believe in your guy. And I actually do believe Hearn and company do believe in Joshua. So I don't think it's the former, I do think it's the latter. The question is, why does that have to happen now then? If you believe in him, make your money, let him knock out some more tomato cans, step him up gradually after Sprott, have the guy above Sprott, say, in 2 more fights. Then after that, have 2 more. By this point, you have 20, 21 fights. He's in the top 10 of every single organization out there. He has shots at the title potentially here. Ruslan Shagayev is a potential option. You have Bermane Stiverne, Deontay Wilder winner. That's possible there, particularly if it's Wilder, considering it'd be 2 punchers, undefeated, potentially all with knockouts. A bronze medalist from America, a gold medalist from England. I'm pretty sure some promoter out there could find a way to sell that fight. And there's no necessary risk, or unnecessary risk, I should say, taken. For all intents and purposes, you can do these things. You can get to that point. Again, from Joshua's perspective, you can get to that point without taking very many unnecessary risks. You're going to have to step it up, and so there are going to be risky fights. But I'm saying unnecessary in that there's no title on the line. It's not the biggest fight that can absolutely be made, and there's quite a bit of danger involved. The problem that people tend to run into when they try to match up these fighters, where there's a name over here, and oh yeah, he's been knocked out maybe, or he maybe people aren't thinking he's going to be what he once was perceived to be, or whatever. When you have those sort of fights, you always forget that there was a reason this guy was so highly touted at one point. Maybe it was his speed, his boxing ability, or in Price's case, his power. But there was a reason people liked what they saw out of him. And maybe it didn't happen the way they thought it was going to in his career. Maybe it never will, who knows. But the point is, in this case, Price can still punch. I don't think the fact that a huge, giant, muscular man, the fact that guy can bang the hell out of someone if necessary has changed just because he was stopped twice by one person who has great experience and who was taken deep into fights with Vladimir Klitschko. I don't think this is somehow no longer the case. I'm pretty sure it's still possible that he can punch. And again, it just seems an unnecessary risk. I'm watching the fight. I find it interesting. I would love to see it. If it happens, I'll definitely be tuning in. And I even mentioned on Twitter, I'd love to see it happen. It would be a very interesting fight. I just don't know if it needs to happen, that's all. But again, a lot of things don't need to happen. I'll still be fine with it. In any event, I'd love to hear your take on the fight, actually. Who do you think would win the fight? When do you think it should happen? Do you think it should happen? And what do you think of the progression that Anthony Joshua has shown thus far? Granted, it's against limited opposition, but at this point, insofar as professional fighters are concerned, he is a limited fighter. He has had limited fights. So it seems to be a little fair there. So keeping that in mind, what do you think of his progression? What do you think of the David Price fight? Tell us all of that great stuff that you have for us in the comment section below and on Twitter at 12Rounder Boxing. And of course, be sure to click over to part 2, where I'll be speaking about the Gennady Golovkin versus Marco Antonio Rubio event that'll be coming up this Saturday. So be sure to click over to part 2 for that. Might have some interesting stuff, or not, who knows. Like, comment, share, subscribe, all that great stuff. See you on the other side.